Hey guys, welcome and thanks for hanging out with me today. And it's okay, mics are open and everyone can chat. This is just a fun hangout with some really cool writer peeps that I'm pretty excited that I just get to hang out and chat with you guys for for the next hour. But for some formalities, if anyone wants to just introduce who they are, and then we can, I guess people join us later, we can introduce people. Okay, fair enough. Kathy, I have dogs and issues going on too. So I will honestly, that when Liz gets home, you're going to hear it and I'll try and mute my mic. The dogs will go ape shit. But my name is Mark Leslie Lefebvre and I'm the host of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. And here are just a few of my awesome patrons hanging out with me, sharing their reflections, chatting about the love that we have of the business and craft of writing. And over to my left, I have Jeff. Jeff, do you want to share?
Hey, I'm Jeff. I am a fiction writer and I do the Dialogue Doctor podcast. And I have a fun story. About 3 years ago, I was having an existential crisis as a writer and I reached out to Mark for coaching and help. And his advice kept me writing. So I'm actually here
Not
and
only
doing
that,
the Dialogue Doctor.
And Dialogue Doctor, dude.
Mark, yeah, because Mark kept me in the game. Which is great.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. And look at how many people you are helping every week. That is amazing.
Helping. We'll put that in quotes.
No. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Dialogue. I'm going to leave a link, of course, to the Dialogue Doctor so people can check it out if they have not. Yeah. All right. And below you, I have another podcast host. I have Maddie Dalrymple.
Hello. I am Maddie Dalrymple. I write the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also podcast, write, speak, and consult on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the indie author.
Cool. There'll also be, of course, a link to the indie author in the notes for this. That's exciting. Okay. And Kathy Mack, who did say she was going to be sporadic because there's dogs coming in and out of the house at all hours.
The door is right there, and they just yeah, it's freezing rain outside, so you'd think they would stay in, but oh no, they're going to want to go in and out. My name's Kathy Mack. That's my pen name. I teach creative writing at St. Thomas University in Fredericton. And Jeff, I have sent many students to your website.
Oh, thanks.
and Maddie, I have sent many people to your blog. So
cool.
It all works out.
Thank you.
So I am primarily a poet and huge on editing and on revision. So, and I stumbled across Mark's website when he did an article for the Writers Union of Canada. Remember that article all those years ago?
Yeah.
And I've been hooked on his podcast. You know, you've got that on your conscience too. You've got this entire writing mafia across Canada and the world, and it's all down to Mark. And now my dog wants back in again. Can you hear him scratching at the door? Right. So I'm going to go do that.
And it's a perfect segue over to Shari Decter Hirst. Hey, Shari.
Hi, Mark. Merry Christmas, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I write historical fiction. I've been a client of Jeff's, and he's helped me through all kinds of interesting dialogue dilemmas. That I've been a patron supporter of Mark's for, I think, from almost the very beginning. And love the blog, Maddie. I read it all the time. I really appreciate it. I'm sort of trying to get my stories to have more of a suspenseful twist, and you've given some great advice. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you. That's so fun to hear.
I love that this is just a love-in of people who are engaged in the community and wanting to help others and interact and connect. It's phenomenal. All talented writers, all talented people, not afraid to share and comment. This is going to be open discussion because I get to pick your brains. This is going to be such a benefit for me. But Shari sent some questions ahead of time. Shari, do you want to read them yourself or should I read them? Like, what's the?
You go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the first question, I'm reading Mastering Plot Twists by Jane Cleland. Excellent craft book. and she emphasizes the importance of establishing a strong narrative question, the question or theme that drives your book. My question is, I'm writing a 2-book series. Should I consider 3 narrative questions, i.e. one overarching for the series with 2 sub-narrative questions based on the theme for each individual book, or 2 distinct narrative questions and no overarching theme, or 1 overarching theme for both books? 1, 2, 3. So first of all, I'm making a note of that book because I want to go check it out. So, Jane Cleland, Mastering Plot Twists. And that is such a great question. I want, if everyone is willing, you don't have to, but I'd love for your take on it. I'm going to start off with, I kind of think you need 3 overall. I think you need 1 per book. That's what my approach would be. I would want 1 per book, right, for the story arc within each of the books, and then potentially one large one for the series, whether it goes on more than 2, and maybe that question changes. So that's sort of my thoughts. Feel free to jump in, guys, whoever wants to sort of share their thoughts on this. Maddie.
I think 3 also, and I was just thinking in terms of my own series. So I have 1 series, the Ann Kinnear series, that in both the cases, I didn't know they were going to be series when I started the first book. So when I was writing the first Ann Kinnear book, I thought it was going to be, Ann Kinnear gets in trouble and gets out of trouble, basically. And then when I realized that it was going to be a series, then each book clearly has its own arc. And Ann's arc is really just her evolution over time. One aspect of that is that she becomes more comfortable with her own ability, which is that she can sense spirits. But I haven't planned out, like, hopefully I'll be able to write, dozens of Ann Kinnear suspense novels. So I don't have in my mind that at the end, I want Ann to be such and such. I'm just kind of following Ann along in her progression as a human being. And then each story has an arc. And then for my other series, the Lizzie Ballard thrillers, again, when I wrote the first book, I didn't realize it was going to be more than 1. And so I had 1 arc that was Lizzie gets in trouble, Lizzie gets out of trouble. And then I realized when I was done with that she might have been out of that trouble, but there was more trouble that she was in as a result. And so it became a trilogy. And I had to kind of rethink what I wanted. I wanted each book to end with a certain resolution, but setting it up for the larger arc. And then the third one, wrapping things up in hopefully a nice way, so people weren't expecting more.
I highly recommend the Ann Kinnear series, by the way. I've read several of them. They're really
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah.
And the dialogue is exquisite in it, right?
It is. Maddie's a great dialogue writer. It really is.
Thank you.
Maddie, you made me think, because you're talking about the series and stuff like that. I was trying to think of a series that has a overarching question, and the one that comes to mind, Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch, which is the everyone matters or nobody matters.
Yeah.
Or no one matters. And I know Harry's fading off into the distance as Renee Ballard, not Lizzie Ballard, Renee Ballard is taking over in that series, but that it still follows the same premise, I think. I'd love to get an opportunity to ask Michael Connelly that, but that would be an interesting question.
Yeah.
So who else thoughts on the questions? And
I mean, it does feel like when you're going to maybe it's just a genre thing, but when you're going to the, genre, like the Lee Child-esque Jack Reacher genre, I don't know that there's an overarching question for that series. It feels like every time Jack Reacher shows up is the exact same.
Will he ever replace his toothbrush?
Yeah, that's yeah. Will he ever meet someone as strong and powerful as he is? But there's, so I don't know. And I think there's some literary fiction that have no overarching question, but I don't know that people enjoy reading those. So I think it's I don't know. I think I see some places where but then the Reacher novels have a question for every novel, right? Like they're mysteries in a sense. Yeah. So I'm just musing. I don't actually have a point.
Well, I'm curious about what are some of the literary titles that you think don't have that sort of question?
I think about the Golden Finch feels like it has it, but then as you end the novel, it doesn't. Because she doesn't actually, Donna Tartt doesn't actually end the question. She kind of throws the question away, because the question is like, what happened to this painting? And you find out at the end that like, oh, the painting's been gone for a long time. Like, it's not really it's not really a big deal. Yeah, so I think of that one that like has a question and then just kind of tosses it out at the end.
Okay.
But I guess you could say for that one, even the overarching question is kind of like, what's going to happen to this kid who's been through this trauma? So maybe it does as well. Maybe it's that they have them and I'm just not satisfied by how they're answered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the classic one is like The Sun Also Rises, that seems to have no, the question is kind of like, what's happening with this dude Jack? And the answer is potentially nothing. Like that's kind of, yeah. So
but it's well
I don't
written.
know. Yeah, it is. I love it. It's one of my favorite books. It's beautifully written. Yeah, I don't know. Would anybody push back and be like, no, those have narrative questions and Jeff just missed them?
I'd have to go back and read them again I feel like they do, but I don't, it's been a long time since I read the Golden Finch, and I'd have to go back and read it again.
Yeah. By the way, I love that book too. So it's not a criticism. It's
Yeah.
just
No, I get it. It's been a long time since I tried to read the
I like the Golden
There's
Finch, but
many writing styles out there as there are people. Some people are deliberately trying to they're trying to contravene convention, right? They're trying to not do what the books do. So they set up a question, and then they set up another question, and then they set up another question. And by the time you get to the end, you've sort of lost sight of what the first question ever was, and sometimes they'll bring it back to it, and that'll be nice. And sometimes they won't. I don't really have an answer for you, Shari, except another thing that I found out on Mark's podcast was Jay Thorne's and Zach Bohannon's 3-story method.
Yes.
So if you do decide to go with a 3rd story, then that would be a fantastic resource for you, right? And there's a dog that wants in.
yay!
There it is. Yes.
product placement.
I think another storyline that kind of goes against the traditional arc, the traditional overarching arc, is that I finally watched. Oh my gosh, what's the series with Helen Mirren being Jane Tennyson? Do you know what I mean? From back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Anyhow, it'll come to somebody in a moment, or I'll Google. But that one, okay. Spoiler alert for anyone who wants to go watch it and hasn't watched it yet. But
Prime Suspect.
Prime Suspect. Thank you.
Google knows all.
Every episode, of course, is wrapped up. I mean, not necessarily optimistically wrapped up, but wrapped up. And then Jane just has this downward trajectory through the entire series, the multiple seasons, and you're kind of waiting for it to somehow be redeemed. And then the last episode happens and she's not redeemed, and I think it would have been not true to the story if anything else had happened. But it was also like, you get to the end of the last episode and you're kind of like, oh my God, that just, it's pretty clear, she's heading into retirement and her life is now over. And you can't imagine that, in a year, maybe Jane Tennyson's going to be around anymore. But brilliantly done, but it was a shocker.
I got myself in trouble with this question with the series because I started writing a mystery series, The Adventures of Watkins and Howe, and I was like, I'm going to do 4 of these, and for each book I'm going to add a mystery. So in book 1 they do 1 mystery, in book 2 they do 2 mysteries, in book 3 they do 3 mysteries, and then I've been trying to write book 4 for a year and a half, and I can't figure out how to solve all 4 mysteries. So
yikes.
So yeah, I will say, like, playing with this too much kind of froze me a little bit.
You could cheat and just have one of the mysteries be, where did I put the teapot?
Yeah,
that's right.
You could probably fix that one pretty fast.
Yeah.
Well, I was showing Liz some of the Spider-Man movies she hasn't seen yet, in light of the latest Spider-Man film, and we got to the 3rd Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. And one of the problems with that, it's like the worst movie in the entire Spider-Man universe, is but
for the-
it has some great elements. Like it's got Flint Marko, Sandman, and it's got James Franco as the son of the Green Goblin, who becomes the Green Goblin, which was a major storyline in the comics. And then you have Venom, which was another significant, gigantic storyline. And it's almost like I don't know if they realized they're not going to make any more movies, so they just crammed 3 plots into one. Like each one of them could have been a significant villain. You know, Flint Marko being very well, obviously they're all somewhat sympathetic in their ways, right? They all have some sort of, you know, they're not inherently evil. They maybe went insane or whatever. But that was one of the things that I thought was interesting. It was almost like that 4 mysteries that you're talking about, Jeff. You're like, it's like, well, I'm just going to cram 4 mysteries. Just don't have them like going down the street doing the weird, the
strange dancing with the black hair.
Yeah,
with
the
comb
black hair
the wrong
and the
direction.
and stuff like that. It's like, this is an embarrassment.
Yeah.
If
All of
they
a sudden it's West Side
do
Story.
it in Batman, they can do it in Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Villains? How many villains? How many villains can dance on the head of a? I don't know.
Yeah. So Shari, in terms of the series that you're talking about, are you interested in? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am. Are you interested in talking about the potential questions you have per book or for the series? Because I think that might be a fun thing for us all.
Yeah, again, it's historical fiction, and it's set in 1920s in New York City.
Okay.
And the question that I was or sort of one of the themes, which seems to be a recurring theme in all my books, is just sort of what is family, right? And so Lucy, who is the protagonist, is a very young woman, early 20s, who grows up in an Italian-American family. And I'm, because it's historical fiction, doing all kinds of great research on and what it means to be a second generation Italian American, and you know, some of those pressures. Of course, you have gender issues, ethnic issues, religious issues, and of course, like all good books, she gets pregnant out of wedlock. And what does that mean? And so this family, who has always meant sort of loyalty and security and love, throws her on the street. And again, so the first book will go to the point where she finds out she's pregnant, and then the second book is what happens after that. And then, Jeff, you'll know she winds up in Pony Gulch, Montana. But anyway, another story for a different day. So I was thinking what I would do is take that idea of family, because there's all those different kinds of pieces to it. And, you know, one book would be an exploration of sort of loyalty and what that means to, you know, all of her brothers and sisters and her parents and her aunts and her uncles and this very large extended family. And some are loyal and some aren't loyal. And what does loyalty mean and all that kind of stuff. And then the second one would be security, because that's the one where she's the insecure, most vulnerable, and how that sort of winds up. So I'll try and come up with some big, profound questions. But I really like the advice of 3, because I was sort of leaning in that direction anyway, because that'll be the bridge that ties it together. But as you say, Maddie, there'll be a question that's asked and answered in each book.
Right.
I love that. I mean, I wrote down as you were talking, because I'm a visual thinker. I have to see little charts, and I wrote, what is family at the top? And then I had like 2 little lines diverging, like a little triangle thing. What is loyalty? What is security? And it's like, okay, that's the overarching questions that it's going to keep coming up, but here are the specifics. I love that. I'm not a plotter. I'm not someone who does a lot of that pre-work, but I love the fact that you've got this in place, or you're at least thinking about it already.
Yeah, I always thought it'd be interesting to find out from historical fiction writers who are plotters and who are pantsers, because you can't fudge research. You know, if you're writing a contemporary novel, then you can speak from your own experience and that, but you know, by God, if you don't know what that 1923 rifle is, and was it there in June or was it there in September? You know, like
Yeah.
I got into a great discussion about when a particular movie had come out as a talkie, because I happened to mention in the book that, you know, they were listening to it. And, you know, like it's amazing what real buffs of history sort of fixate on. So anyway, it's thank goodness for internet and Google and this wonderful world we live in where we've got instant access. So that's why I spend so much time outlining, is that, you know, to try and identify what some of the big unknowns are going to be in terms of research, let alone plot and those kinds of things. And then as I get started writing, I've got to start plugging in the idiosyncrasies of, you know, kinds of beer sold in saloons in Montana in 1927.
So it's funny you talk about that, because you do that for history, and obviously you're going to get history buffs who are going to be very much, no, that didn't come out till June, and this book was set in May. What are you talking about, Willis? That kind of thing. And so I had that in the last book that I released, because it's only set in July of 2017. But I first of all have to know what the weather was.
Yes.
Because if the guy wakes up outside, is he going to be wet or is it going to be dry? Are you going to be able to see the moon or not? That kind of thing. And then even little things like I had a character who referenced really loving a Taylor Swift song. And I had to make sure that album had come out, because I'm going like, yeah, it's out now. It's been out for years, but that was 2017. There are little things like that are constantly like, oh, wait, that movie hasn't come out yet. And I did reference a movie, and it was like, oh no, that only the first in that series of movies came out, so I can't reference anything that happened. So I caught myself several times having to double check. Well, and then historically, you know how you can check historical maps on Google too?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, was that business there? Did that business, did that restaurant exist? When did it open? And so I'm checking. I probably spent 30, 40 hours minimum over the course of several months going back and double checking places. And I can't have that restaurant. It doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, historical societies are a real godsend. You know, they're usually run by either very underpaid staff or volunteers. And the amount of research that they've been able to help me with things like, you know, what was the name of that store at that location at that date, and who was the owner, because I need to include that in my story. And you know, it just amazes me, the stuff that, you know, they come back with the name and the deed and archival photographs and, you know, little interesting tidbits from an oral archive that they just happen to have squirreled away. And, you know, you really rely on these people for, you know, keeping you on the straight and narrow in terms of the writing.
Although I have to say, I think it's in Harriet Vane in one of the Lord Peter Wimsey novels, says that when she has a book come out there, she tries to make it as correct as possible, but there are invariably mistakes, and people will write to her, and she always writes back to them and says, "Thank you very much. I will correct it in the next edition." And she
Yes.
If they ever allow me to do an next edition. Well,
Yeah,
but that strikes me as interesting. So Shari, you're talking about all this research that you're doing, and I know we've all had to do that research for books. Are any of those tidbits that you had to do research for, but you ended up not, because I fall down the rabbit holes. It was like, wow, this was fascinating. I'm not going to use it in the book, but oh my God, this was fascinating. Are those tidbits that you give to your readers, like in a newsletter, or have you guys leveraged that in any way?
I do author's notes at the back of my book for the stuff that's included in the book.
Okay.
Then I have a blog on my website where all kinds of things go. The book I'm just working on right now is about Chinese prostitution in Montana in the 1920s, and some incredible stuff related to that in terms of research and underground tunnels and racism and all kinds of things that is only coming out now just in the last 5 years or so because of archival or archaeological digs and things. And so that some of it goes to my newsletter people, and some of it goes up on my blog, and some of it gets squirreled away for future plots.
I think it's great to have that like persistent content to keep readers engaged over time. Like such a huge benefit to be like the, have, because I think one of the things I know, I'm only really capable of 2 books a year. Like I know other people write super fast. I just can't.
Only 2 books a year.
Yeah, that's all. But so that's having something to like pass on to your readers like that is really cool. To keep them engaged in between the books.
One of the places that I used in Pony Gulch, which is a fictional mining town in Montana, based on a real town, was a store that was so recognizable in the description that someone purchased it and then wrote me to tell me that all the archival photos that I had up on my website were just so invaluable, and they were so excited and they were going to restore it. And, where did I get all that information? And so I put them in touch with the Montana Historical Society. Like, it was like reality and your imagination colliding, in real time. It was just so amazing.
I love when that sort of thing happens, because think about that engagement that you have that has come out of the pages and is now in a multi-dimensional way, where people that to me is some of the hidden power of what we're doing, which is amazing. That must feel really cool, obviously. Or when someone writes and says, "Hey, I noticed this one thing," and they either ask you a question for more details, or maybe they go, "Is that true, or did you make it up?"
Yeah. Well, and of course I use real historical characters as part of the background, like the president and all those kinds of things. And some of the people that populate the town are real as well. And I had someone who was a relative say, we always knew about, Aunt Jenny, and we didn't know this about her. Is it true? And I was able to, pass along a bunch of archival news clippings that I had, sort of said, yeah, she ran a speakeasy. She was a gal.
That's cool.
Reminds me, Lincoln and the Bardo, reading that was an amazing, well, actually listening to the audiobook was a phenomenal experience because of all the voices. He was like gigantic cast, but it's amazing how it's based on real events, and so that these events happen, but obviously the wisecracking or fighting ghosts that are having conversations while he's going into the cave to hold his dead son, and all of it, like it's just, I'm always fascinated at what was, obviously the ghosts were a product of the writer's imagination, but what are the dialogue and the pieces, were those actually documented from our research? And that always fascinates me. I had that same experience. I know it sounds funny, but with Lincoln the Vampire Hunter, right? Because you've got the reference to something that happened in his childhood, which did that lead to his desire with the Emancipation Proclamation, and these little threads, and his son did die of a wasting disease. Was it a vampire bite? like these are the things, and I know it was completely fantastical, but I looked at it, and both of those made me want to read more about Lincoln and his life and stuff like that.
The most powerful question an author ever has is what if?
Yeah, I'm doing that right now with Catherine the Great, or The Great, on Hulu. It's every time an episode starts, it says an occasionally true story. So I'm constantly, like, at the end of an episode, I'm constantly Googling. I'm like, okay, wait, what's real? What's not real? What happened? What didn't happen? Yeah.
Yeah, with Catherine the Great, I mean, a lot of it probably was real. She was a character.
Yeah, and it is interesting to find, like, earlier we were mentioning like little things like a gun, or like, was that gun here, or was that movie here? Like, it's interesting to see, like, oh yeah, that little small detail is actually true. The plot is completely fictional, but the small detail is real. And that's, as a consumer though, that's all I need. I just need that detail, and I feel totally immersed in history. I'm like, oh, it's real. Yeah.
But the detail allows you to buy the mundanity of the situation, so you feel grounded in it, so you can go, and aliens showed up, right? Or it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, they call it verisimilitude, right? So it's, I always remember that word because it's very similar to reality. Verisimilitude.
Yeah. I like that. When we were watching The Crown, the first couple seasons of The Crown, Liz is sitting with her laptop and Googling like news reports of, yes, the Queen went there, and yes, this is what happened when all those miners died, and yes, this. We watched the parallel of the original broadcast of the Christmas address, and then the acted one, and I was so impressed with just how brilliant the actress playing the Queen was in mimicking everything. It was like, just the attention to detail like that just blows my mind.
My wife and I did that exact same thing. We watched it with Google open on the side.
You and a million other viewers.
Yeah.
But thank you. This is awesome. I love this. But Shari had sent another question that I thought would be fun for us to roundtable. And this would be great for all of us, I think. So Shari also said, "I'd love to hear about you and others' planning processes." See, she was already wanting to do a roundtable here. As we hurtle towards 2022, I'm trying to pull all the creative hopes and dreams into a manageable plan of action. Any advice? So planning, we're at the year end, we're all this is often a time of reflection where we go, okay, what did I get done? What didn't I do? What is still on the agenda? Anyone want to start by sort of talking about how do you approach that, and where do you take it? I mean, especially one of the things that it's difficult to plan for right now is, I'm going to an in-person writer conference. Well, it's hard to plan for those things right now.
So I've been, I try not to only do this at the end of the year because it feels so artificial, but one thing I've been working on for years probably is what can I do to get more time for my fiction writing? Because, I'm making more money from my fiction writing than I am from anything else. And it's what's going to carry me forward. And so I'm just getting to the point where I'm starting to bite the bullet and pay people to do some of the things that I'm really not adding any value for. So I got someone to do final edits on my podcast transcripts. And that's saving me quite a bit of time. But I am sort of at the point where I want to, I'm just about to call up my financial planner and say, I need to rework my finances a little bit, because I feel like I don't want to get into a situation like I'm going to start a restaurant and I'm going to make a sandwich, and then I'll sell the sandwich and I'll have a profit of $1, and then I'll buy some napkins. It's like no one runs a business like that. And I feel like I've been resisting. I've been doing that a little bit with my writing and publishing business. And so I feel like at the beginning of 2022, there's going to be this little spate of me spending money on things like, let's have a professional write my book descriptions for the online platforms. Or, you know what, I really don't need to be doing all the posting on social media. Let's get somebody to help me with that. And I'm still very much sorting through how to do that, but I feel like it's important for me to bite the bullet financially in the short term to get some help with those things somebody else can do, so that I can spend more time on the things that somebody else can't do, like writing my fiction. So that's been really, I mean, people who are listening to the podcast are probably sick of hearing about this because I'm always sort of moaning and groaning about this, but that's something I'm really hoping to attack at the beginning of 2022.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. What makes it artificial? Is it the fact that we just decide that this year ends, this year begins?
Yeah, because I think it's an excuse sometimes. You'll be in October and you'll have a good idea, and then you'll think, yeah, in a couple of months, when it's the new year, I'm going to do that. And sometimes, I think people force themselves into doing, the fact that everybody starts exercising in January and then isn't exercising anymore in February is a good
Yeah.
representation. I think sometimes people either force themselves to do something they shouldn't because it's January, or
Right.
push off something that they should be doing because it's only October. And so I think it's important to be thinking of that in a more holistic, like year-round kind of sense.
Anyone else to talk about sort of that year-end sort of planning?
Do what I do.
Don't do what you do.
Just don't do what I do. No, I'm totally stalled. I'm very stalled and have been for several years. I think I'm going to retire at this time next year. I have all these dreams about what's going to happen in retirement, which everybody tells me doesn't happen. You know, like everybody gets more busy when they retire, and I can see the potential for that. But I do have, I like, one of my ideas was a blog called Retired to Write, only it would first say two with the two crossed out and the re added in. So it's too tired to write becomes retired to write. That's what I think.
I like
yeah.
that.
That's very
Well,
clever. I like that too.
Don't do what I do. Just if you're doing anything, just keep doing it. Like, that's the big thing, isn't it? Get your
Yeah.
butt in the chair or standing at the desk or wherever it is and just do the work.
But you teach writing, right? You help students. You mentor.
I
and-
do.
So
teach-
how do you give that up, or do you?
Oh, it's hard. And I'm not sure I will. I think that I'll try to keep teaching, but not in a extended, 14-week term,
Right.
that whole thing, but workshops and short courses, I can see doing that because I do love teaching. I love those aha moments, when somebody gets it, or when one student starts explaining something to another student, I go, yes, they get it well enough, they can explain it. This is great. But I have found that my own writing has suffered just due to the fact that there's not enough hours in the day. It's the same problem that you were having, Maddie, that you're doing things that don't necessarily need you to be the one doing them, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and I also think that the whole concept of retirement is kind of becoming outmoded, because I think that more and more people are just recognizing it as, you do this kind of work for a period of your life because you need to pay the mortgage and save up money and put kids through college or whatever that is. And then at some point you get to make the decision about what you want to do independent of the need to earn that money. And so I think that people of this era, when we retire, we're going to be in much better shape than like my friends' parents, who the dad retires and they think they're going to play golf all the time. And, that's not really a viable way to spend one's life. But if you can stop teaching because you need a paycheck, and instead you can teach in any scenario you want to, independent of whether you're earning a buck for it or not, that's a pretty cool place to be.
I kind of come in from a different vein. I'm a pretty obsessive planner. I have massive spreadsheets that I update at the end of every month, and so January, December, this time for me, like, I'm actually not putting out any Dialogue Doctor stuff for 2 weeks because I'm just planning. So I did a podcast on Monday. I didn't do a newsletter this week. I didn't do a bonus episode. Oh, I did do a bonus episode, but it was just kind of random. I won't do one next week. And part of that's because I'm taking the time to kind of like figure out what my goals were. So for me, if you're into the Clifton Strengths Finder, my top 5 are strategic, context, and achiever. So like, meaning that like I look to the past to understand the future, and I need a plan and I need a goal to achieve. So like, I look at like, okay, what did I accomplish last year? What needs to be maintained? And I'll set goals around like what needs to be maintained. So like last year I did 50 podcast episodes. That seems like I'm not going to do more than that, right? One a week is all I'm going to do. And I'm going to take 2 weeks off during the year. So that goal just carries over. Like, that just needs to be maintained. Other goals, like I have goals for my income. Like, this is how much I made last year. That I'm going to try to do kind of a, big, hairy, audacious goal. Like we used to talk about BHAGs like we used to talk about in production management stuff. So, I'm trying to tenfold that, which is a big, huge goal, which is like, I don't know if I'll hit it, but I do it with my writing too. Like I track monthly word count. I'm like, okay, this is how many words I got done this month. And so I set a goal for myself every month. I'm like, this is the number of words I got. And the way I build those is I actually set out like, okay, these are the books I want to write this year. And then I work backwards. I'm like, if I'm going to publish this thing in May, like I have my next novels coming out in May. And I was like, if I'm going to publish that in May, when do I need to get it back from my editor to do my final rant, to put it into all of the, wide places that I'm going to throw it? And then, how long do I need to give my editor? So that's when I need to have my draft done. And I want to have another, I just became a 3-story method certified editor, and one of the other certified editors is going to do that with me. So I was going to read it for me. So when do I need to have it to her? She's going to take 60 days. So then that's a benchmark. So I'm like, okay, I have to have my draft done by this day to get to all of those other benchmarks where I start like passing it off to team members. And then it's like, okay, so how many words a month, how many chapters? And I actually don't typically think about words per se. I think about chapters. So it's like, how many chapters a month do I have to write to get here? And if that's the number of chapters a month I have to write, how many chapters a week do I have to do? I don't do days because days stress me out, but I will do weeks. So like right now for December, I've got to get 5 chapters a week done to get to my goal for my editors to start taking it and running it. And so that's, I'm just chunking it out, right? Like I know by Saturday, I got to have 5 chapters done. I've got 3 done this week. So it's like, okay, I got to do 2 more. And I have a spreadsheet where I tick them off, and like, I'm looking at it, it's over there. I have a spreadsheet where I tick them off. And as I tick them off, I if I have the due dates on there, and then I can, I pass by them, and it feels really good if I can get ahead of them. So like, that's always my goal, is like, can I get ahead of my due dates? That always feels great. So, but I set all of that up in January. So like right now at the end of December, I'm setting up both books. I've got one book set up till May. The other book I'm hoping to publish in October. And so, and then I have 2 dialogue doctor books in there too. So it'll be 4 books total this year. And I'm chunking all of them out of like, what's my production schedule for all 4 of those books to get them out on these artificial deadlines that I've set for myself, because, I indie publish, nobody's actually waiting on these things. So it's like, but yeah, so I'm a pretty intense planner. I start off, and I take this week from like, thankfully I have a day job that kind of closes down during the end of December to January. We work with a lot of universities and a lot of military contracts, and they're all getting their like PTO, like the military is all getting their PTO in so they don't lose it. So, so all of those clients disappear, and then all of my university clients are like off for Christmas break. So I don't have any, they're doing finals and then they're like disappear. So things just kind of like slow to a halt during this season. So it works. Thankfully, my day job allows me to be this OCD weirdness of planning, to actually like take a week and like pull this crap off. But yeah, I think it's all about what drives you. Like that drives me, being able to like sit down at the end of every week and be like, did I hit my goals this week? And then taking like 3 hours at the end of every month and going through like all of my stats, like what did I sell, what came out, what went in, what books gave away, are any books like popping, like did anything surprisingly hit somewhere? And then like think through like, okay, if that's starting to hit, like maybe I need to add to that series, or maybe I need to like put that somewhere, or like, is that a wave I can capitalize on? 9 times out of 10, it's not. So like that kind of like, just churning around goals is really helpful for me.
I just recently had to come to a decision, a difficult decision. So I'll often invest in something because if I've invested in it, I'm going to get it done. Right? I'm going to drop this amount of money or put up this pre-order or whatever because I worked a deadline. And Teachable was cute because a couple years ago, I think it was after NaNoWriMo, and I bought this, whatever, access to this major, professional package or whatever, thinking I was going to get a bunch of courses up. I didn't. So I threw $800 away. And then last year I went, well, if I put it in, I'll get it done. And I went gangbusters at the beginning of the year, putting together this additional course, 3/4 of the way on this one, 3/4 of the way done on that one. And then the Teachable thing came up, and I went, no, fortunately I've been getting rid of credit cards and low, when I get payments down, I lower the cap, so I can't, so constantly there's no credit available, which is perfect. It's a great place for me to be. So, but then I get the notification that they tried to charge me. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that it's just going to auto charge me. And so I went in and I sat there and made the difficult decision and said, the last 2 years I thought I was going to do this and I didn't do it. And it goes back to my favorite writing mantra is if the act of writing, or if the desire to write is not accompanied by the act of writing, the desire is not to write. So I thought, why don't I just listen to myself? Maybe I'm not going to get it done. Why don't I do it this way? I'm not going to commit the $800 again. So I canceled it. But if I actually go and finish the courses, then I'll pay for it so that I can make some of that money back. Because the money coming in from Teachable was not making up for the $800 on that. And so that was one thing I did this year that's different than I normally do, where I set deadlines. I have 3 pre-orders set up for next year already. One collaborative fiction title that is going to be a really fun project to work on. I was supposed to start working on this month, but we both agreed to start in January. And a nonfiction book that's been the big passion project, which is my ode to planes, trains, and automobiles. It's just a trivial book about planes, trains, and automobiles, because this is the book John Candy was reading in the book, and it never existed. And I thought, I'm going to make this exist. It'll be a trivia book about the movie. And I've actually, it's half written, but I put the pre-order up for next October, which is Canadian Thanksgiving, so that it's out in October. It's available for American Thanksgiving. And then I put up a pre-order for another nonfiction book on accounting for authors that DF Hart and I are writing together. But then I'm looking at it, and this is normally where I would think, what are the things I want to do? Well, 2 of them are collaborations, so I can't monkey around the way I normally monkey around, but they're also, the pre-orders are up, so I can't monkey with them. One of them's a book I've wanted to do for 4 years. I had the idea years ago, and every time October rolls around and I start thinking Thanksgiving in my Canadian way, I think, oh, I should do this. Well, I actually started working on that book in the summer, but realized there was so much more research. I found the original script from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. So there's deleted scenes and all kinds of stuff that I found out that is like, no, I got to dig further. I can't just, I can't. And so right now I'm thinking about, what are the other books I want to write? This last year, at least 2 books I released, I had no idea I was going to write them until stuff happened. Joanna and I, for example, with the Relaxed Author, we didn't ever plan on that. And the experience of being able to say yes to a project that I had so much fun and I got such intrinsic reward out of, I want to make sure in my planning, and I always do stuff I never plan, but I want to make sure that I plan for being able to say yes to a project, because like, oh, I'd love to do that. I don't know if I can, because I've already maxed myself out. So my planning, and again, it's the 22nd of December as we're recording this. So I really hope I have some time to actually sit and just chew on things for several hours. And I may be doing some travel the last week. So that may be giving me an opportunity to say, okay, instead of putting a podcast in my head or an audiobook in my head, I'm just going to sit and think for a bit and maybe make some notes. And so I'm hoping, I don't think those 3 books are going to be enough to satisfy me in the way that writing a full-length novel satisfies me. I don't know if you guys get that feeling where you don't have that.
Yeah.
I think so much of like the planning techniques we use, or like how we build stuff, has to do with like you're saying, like, understanding ourselves and playing off of our strengths and weaknesses. Like, part of the reason I'm such an obsessive planner is because I know I have crazy brain, and like without a plan, I'm jumping from like one book to the next. I'll be writing like 5 books at a time, and none of the books are going to be quality because I'm like jumping all over the place. So if I don't have like a schedule to like having that, like the reason the planning works for me is because I have to have that to like make sure I stay on track. And it sounds like, Mark, part of what you're saying is that like deadlines work for you because they keep you like, disciplined. It sounds like if you owe somebody something, it's going to keep it. So like a pre-order is like, oh my gosh, I owe these people this thing. Or like collaborative writing is like, oh, I have this other person who's dependent on me. So I have to keep like focused on keep moving.
Or a deposit with an editor. Okay. And their window is this. And if I miss it, too bad for me. That's helped me in the past. Yeah.
But I think it's all about like figuring out your planning, and how you plan is all about like self-understanding and understanding what it's gonna do to force you to keep your butt in that seat. Out those words. Yeah,
all those approaches, just I'm almost having an anxiety attack just hearing about them. So
Maddie, you want to see my spreadsheets? I'll show you all of my spreadsheets. I have such great spreadsheets. Color coded.
Oh my God, when was the last time I got an offer like that?
Yeah.
I come up and see my spreadsheets.
I can do all that for my nonfiction and marketing and admin and stuff, but I cannot do it for my fiction. Like planning out to that level for fiction, it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
I'm finding this year is going to be really different for me because I'm a prolific fast writer. So I easily can write 5 books a year from beginning to end, no problem. And which is great if you're trying to do a rapid release, or you've got a whole series and you go back and forth and tweak and bring everything into line. And at a few months ago, I decided, no, I'm going to write books sequentially. So I will start a book, and then I will write it, and then I'll publish it, and then I'll start the next book. And I'm looking at my plan, and there's all this white space. And I'm like you, Jeff, like, I want to fill it in, right? I want, because, I was thinking, oh, it's going to be at the developmental editor, and it's going to be like 6 weeks. Oh, I could start another book. And I said, no, Shari, you don't start another book. So, now I'm beginning to think, well, okay, so what am I going to do? Well, I can pre-write some blog posts, or I'll, pre-schedule Facebook posts, or, those kinds of things. But it's terrifying almost to see all that white space, thinking, and where does the money come? Because of course, one of the advantages of doing 5 books a year is that you've got a backlist that is always continually, chewing out nice little steady stream of revenue. So that's going to slow down a lot. And so it's kind of it's a big deal for me this year because it's a different floor.
Wow, interesting. Wow. This is so cool, by the way, I have to say, just talking about our different processes is very, very beneficial. We had, Kathy, you had a question you wanted to hear everyone's take on. We've got roughly maybe about 8 minutes, according to my clock. I want to keep it close to an hour. We started a couple minutes in, but do you want to ask the question, or should
I was just interested in the tension between deadlines and editing. Because I read a lot of stuff. I download a lot of digital books, and I get so upset when I read a story that I think I can see how fantastic it could be, and it's not there yet, because they published it too soon. Right. And quite often I think that's because they've set themselves a goal and they're going to publish by a certain time. Right. And they don't, so the work itself, I feel like it suffers. So I'd like to hear you guys talk a bit about that tension.
Can I clarify what I think you mean there? Yeah, and it's not that it wasn't copy edited or line edited or proofread. It was that there was a developmental issue in the story.
Both, all of those kinds of editings. Quite often a developmental issue, but sometimes it can just be something as simple as bad proofreading, or unrealistic, where the character's language changes from scene to scene. So
Right.
so there stylistically there's a problem there.
Right.
You know,
Well, that's
it
their
happens-
dialogue is not needs to visit the doctor.
Right,
It
come see
needs,
me.
yeah, it needs more editing.
I actually just faced this because I was on for the Ann Kinner books. I had a goal of 2 Ann Kinner books a year, and I had gotten one out last October. I got one out in April. And I wanted to get one out this past October. And I was really struggling with it. And eventually, in like September, I realized that wasn't going to, work. And I had the appointment, the book time with my editor. And I usually only do one edit. He does the developmental editing that he does, I can usually incorporate. So he's doing kind of developmental editing, but he's also calling out stylistic things.
Mhm.
And so I think that he read it in October. I had to reschedule with him. It worked out well for both of us. So I got in touch with him and I said, I can give you something at the date that we originally talked about, but it's going to be sketchier than I had hoped. And so it worked out well for both of us to push it back. We pushed it back a little bit. I got his comments back and I was incorporating those. And I thought, oh, well, December, definitely I'll be able to get it done by December. And it was one of these things because of the nature of my plots that like pulling one thread was making something else unravel. And so to fix this, I was going to have to fix a whole bunch of other stuff too. So it really started snowballing and it was all good stuff. It was all clearly making the story better, but it was taking much longer. And so for the first time, I've had to schedule a second edit with my editor because it's going to be sufficiently different that, I need an impartial professional set of eyes on it again. And so I am driven by deadlines to the extent that I did book the time in January with him to take another look at it. But while all this was going on, I'm also talking to a friend of mine who's traditionally published and is also on the same 2 books a year schedule, except you know what, she can't change it. If I get to November and my book's still crappy, I can say, you know what, I could publish a crappy one this month, or I could publish a good one in 2, 3, 4, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm guessing probably March maybe before it'll be out. And I'm going to feel so much better about my book and myself because I had the intestinal fortitude, but also the like contractual ability to make that change for myself. And I think that anytime when one lets the date drive the delivery and not the quality drive the delivery, it can be painful for the author and the reader.
Yeah. Friend of mine, Catherine Bush, her first book, Terms of Engagement, won all sorts of awards. So her sophomore book, she got a big contract from a big publisher and had to work to a deadline. Didn't like the hardcover version. This was about 18 years ago. Didn't like the hardcover version. So she actually revised it. And the paperback, which came out a year later, is it's got some pretty major differences from the
publisher
hardcover.
did that.
That's
Because
very
they use
interesting.
they
I've never
usually
heard
do the
that before.
They use the same templates typically for hardcover and trade.
I think she insisted. She was
Wow.
really unhappy. Like she was not happy.
Wow,
Wow, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
that's a good
especially-
publisher.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was,
I had issues with one, and even between print runs, the publisher was like, yeah, maybe it's not worth the extra work because again, they're on to the next project. They're not worrying at all.
Yeah.
That's a year old. Who cares?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think
that's
as
very-
well, you've got to have a lot of trust in your editor. I mean, the good editors will give you, tough, frank advice and suggestions. And I mean, even after the books that I've written, I mean, the last developmental edit I got back, I had to stick it in the bottom drawer and like gnash my teeth for about 3 months before I was finished being angry at their obvious stupidity at not seeing the brilliance of my plot and characters. And again, I mean, if I hadn't had that long history with that developmental editor, I probably would have ignored a big chunk of what they said. And I'm like you, Maddie. I mean, the book will be better. now that I'm coming at it again with a different set of eyes. But that level of trust, I mean, I think young writers, early writers, they want somebody to say that they're brilliant. And then after that's happened and a few times and you've maybe stubbed a toe or two, I mean, you recognize that sometimes, tough love is probably the way to go. And I always appreciate hearing it. Sometimes I ignore them, like all good writers do. What do they know, right? They're editors, they're not writers. But hearing that, I mean, it's thrown my whole schedule off because now I'm in the sequential kind of thing. And so I can't start another book until I get this other book finished. And, or my little nascent, 1 month resolution to do books sequentially, I'll throw out the window, right at the very beginning. So that's another thing that I'm finding very difficult, is because I get really excited about the next idea. In fact, my ideal job would be just to churn out ideas for other people to write, because, I can see them all. And so it's tough. It's tough, that tension between deadlines and editorials.
Shari, I experienced that with the last book, where when I got the feedback back, I was so emotionally invested that I actually had to take 3 weeks of, let's just put it here until I can actually look at it and think about what was said in a way that is not confrontational and not me being defensive, but me actually seeing what needed to be changed. And that I had to actually push the release date and risk myself with Amazon, because that was my one hit. But otherwise I was not going to have something that I felt proud of. But I needed the time to digest what I needed to fix, more than I needed the time to fix it. if that makes any sense.
Exactly.
That's very interesting.
Yeah,
exactly. And then again, because then I can go, thank you, rather than, damn, you don't understand, you don't get me, you're like, I'm a teenager and you're my parents, right?
What do you know?
That actually, when I think about it, the very first poem I got published in a periodical called Acta Victoriana out of University of Toronto. They sent it back to me and they said, we really like this poem, we'd like to publish it, but you have to drop the last 2 lines. And I spent the weekend storming around my apartment saying, those are the, everything's in there, that is, it has to be there. And then on Monday morning, I sort of put my hand over the last 2 lines and went, crap, they're right. Totally didn't need to be there.
And who wants to eat crow like that, right?
Well, apparently I do, because we keep going back, right?
Yeah, I think for me, I'd throw another thing in is the tension, because for me the tension isn't between the writing and the deadline. And I also don't struggle with editor notes, and I think part of that is I'm so new to writing. I've only been writing for 7 years. And so I assume I'm wrong. Like I get a note back. I'm like, oh, you clearly know more than I do. And sometimes that's to my detriment. There's notes I've gotten back that I should have been like, no, they don't see what I'm trying to do here. And I may not be doing it well enough, but, deleting it or taking it out isn't the right action. I just need to reform it some. But the other tension for me has always been resources. So like, when I started writing, part of what drew me into indie writing, indie publishing, was that I found that I could do most of it for free. Because of life choices my wife and I made. We both worked jobs that paid very little, and we have 5 kids. And so like, there was like most months of my 30s, I was like trying to figure out how to pay the mortgage. Like I was literally like living on a prayer. Like I pray that money falls from the sky somewhere so we can actually like pay the mortgage on our house and keep the lights on. And so writing indie publishing for me was like, oh, this is something where I could use this weird skill I have in storytelling and hopefully generate some income in a way that won't cost me anything. Because like Microsoft Word, I could write in because my works supplied it. I could upload that Word document to KDP, and I could like, MailChimp. I didn't have any readers, so MailChimp was super free for me. As a friend, like, yeah, I can send out a newsletter for free. I can put my butt in a chair once a week and do that. But I will say, I've published 11 novels, and my first 9, I didn't have the money for editors. I was like bartering and trading to get things done, and none of them are to a place where I'm proud of. Like they all have. Like I had a reader email me just last week who was like, hey, I blew through all 4 books in your first series. And she's like, when are you going to write the 5th one? I'm just kind of like, it's been 4 years. This is not coming. And she was like, I love it. It's great. There are some typos. And I'm like, yeah, like I couldn't pay for a proofreader. Like I didn't have that. I didn't have $50 extra, much less, $1,500 extra that would actually cost to get that thing proofread. So for me, the tension has always been between like editing, like the quality of the work and what I can pay to actually afford, what I can pay to put up. And I think it's a weird tension in our world because there's this beauty in indie publishing that it's like opened the gates to everybody, right? Like people, when I started writing, I was in my late 30s. I had no pedigree for writing. I was dyslexic. I have a master's degree in theology, not in English. I don't know anybody. Well, now I do, but back then I didn't know anybody in the author world. Like there were no connections. There was no networking. I couldn't go to conferences. Like I got young kids and I'm working crazy hours. Like there's no like going to a conference to meet people. So somebody like me getting an agent is like a 0 to 0 chance. Like it just wasn't going to happen. But I can sit and crank something. I can read books on plot, and that I checked out from the library, and I can sit at my desk and late at night and crank out a story, and then I can get that story on KDP for a percentage of potential sales in the future. And like that's the beauty of indie publishing, is that it opens the door to so many people that couldn't have gotten into traditional publishing. The downside is those that like, you got to have those resources to put out a quality product. Like when you start thinking of it as like a business and these books as assets that you're putting out of the world, you've got to have those resources to get those team members on board, whether it's relational resources or financial resources to put that stuff into the world. That's always the tension that I've walked, is like, how great do I want to make this? Like right now, my first series, the covers are okay. They're outdated. They're old. It's a good series. I think if I could actually get it in front of people, it would sell. I got to redo those covers. But I'm looking at my bank account. I'm like, I don't have, $800 extra sitting around to pay somebody to redo the covers to the level that I want them done. And it's just that weird, like, that's the tension always for me, is like the quality of the project versus what I have to invest in it. Yeah.
Wow. Fair enough. Guys, I want to thank you so much. This has been, actually, I love this. This has been absolutely
so much fun.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. For listeners, I'm going to go in the backwards route to the way we introduced ourselves, to please share with our listeners where they can find out more about you and your books, etc. online. Shari, we'll start with you.
Sure. Website is sherilynndecter.com, and it's spelled SHERYLNDECTER. And everything's up there.
Awesome. Thank you. And Kathy?
My best bet is the somewhat outdated website, kathymacpoet.ca or .com.ca, one of those. Anyway,
I'll check and I'll put the proper link in. Okay. Maddie.
See, am I up? If people want to find out about my fiction work, they can go to maddydalrymple.com, and that's Maddie with a Y, MATTY. And if they'd like to find out about my nonfiction platform, that's the indieauthor.com, and that's Indie with a Y.
Consistent Y's. And Jeff.
My fiction is at jefffelkinswriter.com. I got a Vela going right now. That's a weekly horror comedy called Nerds. If you're in RDS, if you want something that I'm writing currently, but you can find all my back stuff there too. And then the Dialogue Doctors at dialoguedoctor.com. And there's a podcast, weekly newsletter, bonus Patreon episode, Slack community that's super active, all that stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mark.
This is awesome.